Hi everyone, Pierce Mars here from the Shark Tank Fan Podcast. In this episode, we're going to recap Shark Tank Season 11, Episode 4. But before we get to the podcast, I wanted to mention a couple of things. First of all, it's March 2020, and we are several days into a national quarantine due to the coronavirus. Lisa and I hope and pray that you and your loved ones are safe and healthy and are taking proper precautions to protect yourself until this pandemic has passed. Also, I want to ask you a question. Do you dream of being an entrepreneur? Maybe you have a great idea and you just need to get it going, or you already have a business. Well, regardless of where you are right now, we have learned over the past 11 seasons of Shark Tank that the entrepreneur that is the most prepared and has answers to the shark's questions have the best chance of success in the Shark Tank and in the real world. After 9 years of recording Shark Tank podcast, I decided to create an exhaustive list of the hundreds of questions that have been asked by the sharks. To my surprise, all of these questions fell into just 7 categories. I believe if you can answer those 7 questions, you're well on your way to building a successful business. I put those results in my new book, Could You Survive Shark Tank? The Shark's Top 7 Questions Every Entrepreneur Must Answer. It is available on Amazon in print and Kindle version. You can go to sharktankbook.com for a link to get your copy. And while you are there, you can also sign up for updates and I will notify you of special bonuses. Now, let's get to the podcast.
The best things in life are free, but that ain't really good enough for me. I need money.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Shark Tank Fan Podcast. My name is Pierce Mars, and in this week's episode, we're going to recap Shark Tank Season 11, Episode 4. I've got my good buddy from Charleston, South Carolina, Mr. Jimmy Gibson, the branding magician. What are you doing, Jimmy?
Hey, Pierce, just getting excited about this episode.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun episode. I've never seen one in recent times where it took longer to actually hear somebody actually go out. You know, usually there's always at least one shark that's not interested in every pitch or in, you know, most of the time. But we started getting into the, second and third pitch. I mean, it was like the first couple of pitches everybody was excited about. So nobody went out to like the third person. It was kind of an interesting dynamic. People got excited about these products. So I'm kind of think it's going to be a fun one. Mark Cuban was there, Barbara, Kevin, Lori, and Rohan Oza was in the seat on the far right there. So, do you want to introduce our first guys into the Shark Tank?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Knife Aid is the product. 2 gentlemen, Mark and Michael from Sweden, sharpening by mail. We'll get into what exactly that means, but they were looking for $400,000 for 15% of their business, and they passed out some envelopes and gave a chance to the sharks to look over the process. And we had some nice visuals up there, and they seemed excited right from the get-go.
Yeah, I was. They liked it. It was a good idea. I think their pitch was good, and I thought it was an interesting idea, and they mentioned that knife sharpening being like a little bit of a lost art, and I'd probably have to agree that there's probably a lot of people, they buy their knives and then they might have them for a long time and never sharpen them. You know, they may just let them wear out or whatever. I don't know how it would work, but I know that I sharpen my knives from time to time, and I like them to be sharp when I'm cooking and all that sort of thing. I guess the question is, would you be willing to drop them in an envelope and mail them off for a week and have them turn around and come back? It seems to me that there are some people that are doing that, based on what we're going to talk about in a minute. But what about you? Would you mail your knives off and scissors off to get them sharpened?
Well, it's funny. My wife actually asked for, not a Kevin O'Leary knife that we'll talk about in a minute that he paid $3,500 for, but my wife had asked for a nice knife for a present, and the more you use it, the more it needs to be sharpened. And, it's actually more dangerous to have a dull knife in the house because it can slip and not do what it's supposed to do. And I think they had a nice, almost infomercial demonstration where they got a couple of the sharks up there and showed the difference between a sharp knife and a dull knife. And it's pretty impressive. And as my wife was looking over my shoulder watching the episode, that was the first thing that caught her eye was this service, because we've had a challenge finding a place locally to get your knife sharpened. Now, interestingly enough, Williams-Sonoma will do it for free, even if you didn't buy the knife there, because I think they want you to come into the store. But, it is an investment of time to drive to the store, drop it off, come back, pick it up. So she was very interested in it. And, it seemed like they had a good system to make it simple. You didn't have to worry about packaging it up. They provide the packaging. So they had really thought through the process. I think you can put up to 4 knives in there, $10 a knife, something like that. So for that, I thought it was pretty reasonable. And if you are, if you're in the kitchen a lot, this would be a great service. You send it off, and said it took, a week, or what did they say? How long did it take for it to come back?
Yeah, they said it was a week turnaround. And
which isn't bad.
No, it's not bad at all. I don't think anybody would balk at, having to wait a week to get their knives back. I thought it was a good idea. I remember, and I'm sure this happens all the time, and I just don't know it, but there was a time when when Lisa, my wife, was getting her hair cut and fixed and stuff at this gentleman's salon, and him and his wife owned this salon, and they had a guy that would travel, and his job would be to go around and stop at all of these hair salons, and he would sharpen all of their equipment on site. And and they would pay him, and I can't imagine what it was, but they wanted to keep those scissors and all that stuff really sharp, and they're buying expensive equipment, and they use them a lot, and so this guy would travel around and do that, and obviously that's handy for the people there because they can get it done on the spot. But for us, it would be I think this is something I would use as well, and I got we had a little white elephant kind of Christmas thing with our family, and I ended up with this whole pack of old hickory knives, and they come. Have you heard of them?
No.
Well, anyway, they're. I can remember my grandparents having these knives, and they. You can't put them. You can't get them wet. They'll rust, and they got to be oiled, and they're just an old knife, but they come from the factory. You have to sharpen them. They're not sharpened. You have to sharpen them, and then there's one of my brother-in-law remembered his grandmother having one that had been sharpened so much that it was almost thin down to just there wasn't very much left on it, but the knife had lasted her whole life or something. So
wow. Anyway,
I'm thinking, you know what? Maybe I ought to send those knives to them and let them sharpen them and get them ready for the first time I use them and all that. But anyway, it's like I said, viability. It seemed like it was a good idea, and all the sharks thought it was a pretty cool idea, and I don't know of anybody else doing it. And I thought their demo was good. And what was interesting, I guess Michael, the guy on the left, he'd already been involved with the Happy Socks. He'd been involved with that company, and I don't know if you ever heard of Happy Socks. I've seen them on.
No, I was going to ask you about it. I had not heard of them.
Well, I'm kind of a sock guy. And so I've seen those socks on the shelf, and they come in all different, types of colors and different designs and all that sort of thing. And that's been a pretty successful product. I've seen them in most men's shops and sock stores and all that sort of thing. So I know he's done well with that. So they got into the whole thing and about what they were needing. I guess they did $120,000 in sales. And then they had done $37,000 the month prior, and that was pretty much Facebook, Instagram, kind of an online thing, right?
Right. Yep.
And then they called it the American business strategy. Did you hear them call that? They were wanting to go. I guess they wanted to really blow this thing up, and I think they even mentioned that they wanted to go fast.
Yeah, I think Mark had said that he had failed in the U.S. market before, and I guess from the perspective of someone from another country, maybe it is hard to navigate the ins and outs of how business goes on in the U.S. But I did think that was interesting, the way he positioned that.
Yeah, and so from the standpoint of being there in the Shark Tank, they wanted to. By the way, they wanted $400,000 for 15% in their company, and I think they wanted that money. They wanted to blow this thing up, and they never mentioned exactly how many people they had employed, or I guess they've got a place where there's guys sharpening knives all day. I mean, they never did talk about it, but
right.
It's one of those things where you got to have somebody actually doing the work and sending it back. And I'm sure there's some infrastructure that's around getting those things done. So they didn't talk about it, but evidently they had that part of the business covered. But they wanted to take this, $400,000 and get a shark on board and blow this thing up. And so Lori jumps in and she says she likes it. She'll give them $200,000. Then she'll do the other half, other $200,000 in a line of credit, and she wants 20% instead of the 15% they're offering, and so then they get back into talking about the retail, and I think they mentioned that you mentioned Williams-Sonoma a moment ago. I think they talked about the fact that they would love somebody like Williams-Sonoma to use them as a resource, and people that go to the mall can take their knives to Williams-Sonoma, and they get to keep a percentage of the profit for referring them and sending the knives and using that through their location.
Yeah, that was the interesting thing to me, because my experience with Williams-Sonoma is they don't charge. You drop them off and they do it as a service. So I think they were using that as a representation of a category of these kitchen stores, but Williams-Sonoma specifically, they do it for free right now. So why would they partner with them and then have the customer be charged? Anyway, one of those details, but.
Yeah, well, I think that they probably just didn't think that through, or that wasn't something that they were prepared for in their pitch, because they should have known that already. I think that'd probably be the one downside to the fact that they weren't aware, or maybe they hadn't approached anybody about doing that. So maybe they should have talked about that a little bit before they got involved. But regardless, they were still on their way. They had a good idea. Kevin, who calls himself Chef Wonderful in this particular, he offers them $400,000 for 20%, and then, like I said, it was just like one of those things. The first couple of pitches in this episode, all of a sudden, Lori and Rohan decide they're going to go together for $400,000 for 20%. Then Barbara and Kevin are going to get together. They're going to up it. They're going to give him $500,000 for 20%, and then they get to talking about. Explain to me. Do you remember how did they get on the DTC, the direct to consumer thing? What was it? What was the whole process with that? What were they talking about?
Well, I think they were, they asked, what did you need the money for? And they said that they had the online component handled with these ads and so forth that they've been doing. But I guess it was really those partnerships with various retailers that they would expose this service through their customer base and make these relationships. And so I think when they started talking about Williams-Sonoma, Lori said that she had an in with them. And then I guess Kevin was saying that he was Chef Wonderful and he was going to be able to do that. I didn't follow that, as far as the specific details, but I think it was that push to make those partnerships that already had a customer base that then they could be referred and give that visibility to the product, instead of all of the marketing being done online and counting on that approach. They wanted access to other people's customers.
Well, it was one of those things. I bet it was a nightmare for the editors to try to.
Oh yeah, there was a lot of flurry going on there.
They were trying to chop this thing up, and the guys go out in the hallway to talk, and then Lori follows them, and then Kevin goes, and then Rohan goes, and then Barbara goes, and Mark had already said, that he believed he could help them, but he wasn't gonna grovel like the rest.
He was gonna sit back. Oh yeah,
I'm gonna sit back, and I thought to myself right then, I said, this guy has got these guys have two strong offers with two sharks. I said, I don't. Evidently, he's not that interested because they're in order for them to deal with Mark, they're going to have to want to deal with Mark and turn down these two good offers. I'm thinking, I think his chances of getting it are pretty slim. And it turns out we were right. Soon as Lori and Rohan up their number to match